The glass shattered before I could stop it, and I froze, waiting for the sound of footsteps that never used to come slow. For 3 months I had lived inside the Moretti house, and for 3 months my body had not once forgotten how to flinch. I dropped to my knees and began gathering the broken pieces of the vase, my hands shaking, my sleeve sliding up just enough to show the fading yellow mark on my wrist, before I yanked it back down. "Leave it." I looked up. Damiano Moretti stood in the doorway of the study, dressed the way he always was, dark and unreadable, a man who filled a room simply by choosing to stand in it. His daughter Lucia was asleep upstairs, and it was nearly midnight, which meant he had come down for something quiet, something private, and instead found his daughter's nanny on the floor, with blood beginning to bead on her palm from a sliver of glass. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I'll clean it up. I wasn't paying attention." "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." He crossed the room before I could stand, crouched in front of me, and took my hand without asking permission, turning it gently to look at the small cut. His fingers were careful, in a way that did not match anything I had heard about him in the 6 weeks before I was hired, when the woman at the agency had lowered her voice and told me that the Moretti family was not like other families, that I should keep my head down and my questions to myself and take the enormous salary without asking where it came from. "You've been in this house 3 months," he said, still holding my hand, "and you jump every time a door closes too fast." "I'm just careful." "Careful is not the same as afraid, Elena." I pulled my hand back, tucking it against my chest, and busied myself picking up the rest of the glass so I would not have to look at him. That was when the fabric of my sleeve caught on a shard and pulled up past my wrist, and there it was, plain and undeniable in the lamplight. A bruise, days old, turning the sickly yellow-green color that bruises turn when they are healing, shaped unmistakably like fingers. He went very still. I yanked my sleeve down so hard I heard a small tear, and I stood, gathering the last of the glass into my palm, refusing to meet his eyes. "I bumped into a cabinet," I said. "In the kitchen. Nora can tell you, I'm always knocking into things. Elena, I should get this cleaned up before Lucia wakes and finds glass on the floor. Elena, look at me." I did not want to. I had spent 2 years learning exactly how to not look at someone, how to become smaller and quieter until the person in front of me forgot I had feelings worth reading, and I had gotten very good at it. But something in his voice was different from the voice I had heard him use with business associates who came to the house in dark cars and left looking pale. This voice was quiet. This voice sounded almost careful, the way you might speak to something small and injured that you were afraid of frightening further. I looked at him. His eyes moved from my face to my wrist and back again, and I watched him do something I had not expected. I watched him decide not to push. He straightened, took the glass from my hands without asking, and set it on the side table. "Go to bed," he said. "I'll handle this." "Sir, it's my job." "Go to bed, Elena." I went. I climbed the stairs to my small room beside Lucia's, the room with the narrow bed and the window that looked out over the back garden, and I sat on the edge of the mattress with my heart still hammering, replaying the way his gaze had lingered on my wrist, wondering how much a man like that could see when he decided to look closely at something. I had taken this job because I had nowhere else to go. My husband, Victor, had made sure of that. He had spent 2 years slowly cutting away every person I might call if things went wrong, every friend, every cousin, until the only voice on the other end of my phone was his. When I finally left, in the middle of a gray Tuesday morning, with a single suitcase, and no plan beyond the next hour, I had nothing. No savings of my own, no family close enough to help, just a resume that had gone stale, and a desperate need for a place to sleep that did not require explaining every bruise. The nanny agency did not ask many questions. They needed someone reliable, someone who could start immediately, someone willing to live in a house that made most applicants nervous once they learned whose house it was. I was reliable. I was desperate. I did not care whose name was on the deed as long as the man behind it did not remind me of the one I had run from. For 3 months, Damiano Moretti had not reminded me of Victor at all. He was strict but never unkind. He asked after his daughter's day every evening without fail, and he listened to my answers as though they mattered. as though the small details of a 6-year-old's world, a lost tooth, a drawing of a dog with too many legs, a tantrum over broccoli, deserved his full attention even after a day spent doing whatever it was men like him did during business hours. I did not know exactly what that was. I had learned not to ask. What I did know was that Victor had found me twice already since I left. Twice he had called the agency's main line, pretending to be a concerned brother looking for his sister. Twice they had told him, truthfully, that they did not share client information. But he was clever and patient in the way that predators are patient, and I had begun to feel, in the last few weeks, the particular chill of being watched by someone I could not see. 3 nights ago, walking back from the corner store 2 blocks from the estate, I had seen a car that looked like his idling across the street. I had told myself it was nothing. Tonight, the ache in my wrist where he had grabbed me the last time we spoke, on the phone, when I made the mistake of saying I would not come back, that ache was not nothing. I heard a soft knock at my door sometime later, and when I opened it, Nora, the housekeeper, was standing there with a small first aid kit. "He asked me to bring you this," she said, "for the cut. He didn't have to do that." Nora studied me for a long moment, the way older women sometimes do when they have already guessed most of a story and are deciding whether to say so. "He doesn't do a lot of things he doesn't have to do," she said finally. "Except when it comes to you and that little girl. Then he seems to find reasons." I did not know what to say to that, so I thanked her and closed the door. I did not sleep well. I kept hearing his voice in my head. "Careful is not the same as afraid, Elena," and wondering how a man who was supposed to be the most dangerous person in 3 counties, according to whispers I had heard from the kitchen staff, could sound so gentle when he wanted to. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Lucia singing badly in the hallway, and for a moment, the fear from the night before felt distant, almost foolish. I dressed, checked that my sleeves covered my wrists completely, and went downstairs to start the day the way I started every day, folding myself small enough to be safe, hoping no one would look too closely again. But Damiano was already in the kitchen, standing by the window with a cup of coffee he was not drinking, and when I walked in, he turned to look at me with an expression I had not seen on his face before, not suspicion, not pity, which I could not have stood, something else, something that looked almost like the beginning of a decision. "There's a driver," he said, "starting today. Ivan. He'll take you and Lucia wherever you need to go from now on." "I don't need a driver, sir. The store is only 2 blocks. "Ivan will take you," he said again, and this time there was no room in his voice for argument. "It isn't a request." I opened my mouth to protest and then closed it, because something in the set of his shoulders told me he already knew more than I had told him, and that whatever he knew, he had decided it mattered enough to change how the household ran. Lucia came bouncing into the kitchen then, still in her pajamas, and threw her arms around my legs the way she did every morning, and for a moment, the tension in the room dissolved into the ordinary business of breakfast, and lost shoes, and the small chaos of getting a 6-year-old ready for the day. I did not look at Damiano again during breakfast, but I felt him watching, and for the first time in a long while, being watched did not feel entirely like a threat. It felt like something closer to being seen. I told myself it did not mean anything. I told myself men like Damiano Moretti did not concern themselves with the private histories of the women who worked in their homes, that the driver was simply caution, simply the natural instinct of a careful man protecting his household from anything unpredictable. I told myself all of this while I packed Lucia's lunch and braided her hair and pretended my hands were not still faintly trembling. But that night, after Lucia was asleep and the house had gone quiet, I stood at my window and looked down at the driveway, where a black car I did not recognize sat parked just inside the gate, its headlights off, a shape behind the wheel that did not move for a very long time. I told myself it was nothing. I did not entirely believe it. The phone rang at 2 in the morning, and I answered it before I was even fully awake, my body responding to the sound the way it had been trained to for 2 years. "Elena." Victor's voice slid through the line like something oily. "You didn't think I'd stop looking, did you?" I sat up in the dark, my heart slamming against my ribs. "How did you get this number?" "I have my ways. I always have my ways. You know that better than anyone." Don't call me again. You're living in a criminal's house, Elena. Do you understand that? Everyone in this city knows what Damiano Moretti is. You left me for safety, and you ran straight into the arms of a man who probably has bodies buried under his rose garden. Goodbye, Victor. Wait. I ended the call and sat there in the dark, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles ached, waiting for my pulse to slow. It did not slow for a long time. When it finally did, I turned the phone off completely and did not turn it back on until morning. I did not tell anyone about the call. What would I say? That my ex-husband had somehow gotten a number I had only had for 6 weeks, a number I had never given to anyone outside the household. The idea that he might have people watching me closely enough to learn something like that made my skin crawl, but saying it out loud would mean explaining everything, and I was not ready to hand my whole broken history to a man whose own history I understood even less. Still, something in me had shifted since that night in the study. I found myself watching Damiano differently, noticing small things I had overlooked before. The way Marco, his second, would appear near the front gate at unpredictable hours and simply stand there, watching the street, before disappearing again. The way the household staff spoke about their employer with a strange mixture of fear and fierce loyalty, as though he had earned both in equal measure and never asked for either. The way Lucia, who could not have known any of the dangerous things whispered about her father, adored him without a single reservation, climbing into his lap every evening and demanding stories about knights and dragons that he told with more patience than I would have guessed a man like him possessed. One evening, about a week after the phone call, I was reading Lucia her bedtime story when Damiano appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching us with an expression I could not quite name. "She likes the one about the dragon best," I said, not looking up from the book. "She's made me read it 4 nights in a row." "She used to make her mother read it every night for a month," he said quietly. I looked up then, surprised. He rarely mentioned his wife, and the staff had told me only that she had passed away when Lucia was 2, though no one had ever told me how, and I had learned quickly not to ask. "She would have liked how you read it," he said. "You do the dragon's voice the same way she used to." "I didn't know that." "I know." He pushed off from the doorway. "Finish the story. I'll be in the study." After Lucia fell asleep, I found myself walking toward the study instead of my own room, though I could not have said exactly why. The door was open, and Damiano sat behind his desk with papers spread in front of him, a glass of something amber near his hand, untouched. "You wanted something?" he asked, without looking up. "I wanted to thank you. For the driver. For not asking too many questions." Now he did look up. I asked exactly the questions I wanted answers to. I simply didn't ask them out loud. "What do you mean?" He set down his pen. "I mean that I know your ex-husband's name is Victor Cole. I know he has called the agency twice since you started here, and I know he has been seen twice in the last month within a few blocks of this house, once in a car that circled the block 4 times before leaving." I felt the blood drain from my face. "How do you know all of that?" "Because I make it my business to know things that concern my household," he said simply. "And you concern my household, Elena, more than you realize. I never told you his name." "No, you didn't." He held my gaze, steady, unapologetic. "I'm not going to pretend I found that information by accident, or that I don't have resources most people don't have. I looked into it because a woman who works in my home, who cares for my daughter every day, came into this house flinching at raised voices and hiding bruises under long sleeves in the middle of summer. I wanted to understand why. My hands had started to shake, and I pressed them together to stop it. "You had no right." "You're correct. I didn't ask your permission, and I should have." His voice, for the first time since I had known him, carried something close to an apology. "I won't do it again without telling you first, but I won't pretend I regret knowing what I know." I sat down in the chair across from his desk without being asked, because my legs did not feel steady enough to keep standing. "He was not always like that," I said quietly, the words coming out before I had decided to let them. "In the beginning, he was attentive. He made me feel like I was the only person in the world worth paying attention to. It took me a long time to understand that the attention was never about me. It was about control. He decided who I could see, what I could wear, how much money I could touch without asking him first. When I finally tried to leave, the first time, he found me within 2 days and made sure I understood what would happen if I tried again. And the second time? The second time, I planned better. I left while he was traveling for work, and I didn't tell a single person where I was going, not even my own sister, because I didn't trust that he wouldn't find a way to get it out of her. I looked down at my hands. I've been running for 8 months. I thought coming here, to a house everyone is too afraid to approach, might finally be far enough. Damiano was quiet for a long moment. "It should be far enough," he said finally, "but I want you to understand something about the people who work for me, and the people who protect this house. If Victor Cole comes near this property again, he will be dealt with, quietly and completely. I need you to know that before it happens, so it does not frighten you when it does. Dealt with how? However is necessary to make sure he never frightens you again." I should have felt afraid of what that meant. Instead, sitting in that dim study, with a man who had just admitted to investigating my entire private history without asking, I felt something I had not felt in longer than I could remember. The strange, unsteady relief of being protected by someone who was not doing it to control me, but because he had decided, on his own, that I deserved to be safe. "Why does it matter to you?" I asked. "I'm the nanny. You could have hired anyone." He looked at me for a long moment before he answered, and when he did, his voice had dropped to something quieter than I had ever heard from him. "Because I have watched you with my daughter for 3 months, and I have never once seen you raise your voice to her, never once seen you flinch away from her affection, the way you flinch from everything else in this house. Whatever that man did to you, he did not manage to take the gentlest parts of you. I find that I would very much like to make sure no one takes them from you now either." I did not know how to respond to that, so I said nothing at all, and we sat together in the quiet study for a long while, the papers on his desk forgotten, the glass of amber liquid still untouched. In the days after that conversation, I began paying closer attention to the small rhythms of the house, things I had been too frightened or too tired to notice before. I noticed that Marco checked the perimeter cameras every morning before breakfast, standing in the hallway with a tablet in his hand, scrolling through footage with the calm efficiency of a man performing a task he had done 10,000 times. I noticed that Nora kept a spare key to my room hidden inside a drawer in the kitchen, in case, she told me once, I ever needed someone to reach me quickly, and the door happened to be locked. I noticed that none of the staff ever discussed Damiano's business in front of Lucia, not out of formal instruction it seemed, but out of a shared, unspoken agreement that her world should remain untouched by whatever the rest of them carried. One afternoon, while Lucia napped, Nora found me in the kitchen, peeling vegetables with more force than the task required, and she took the knife gently from my hand and set it down. "You're going to cut yourself," she said. "Sit." I sat. She poured 2 cups of tea and sat across from me, studying my face the way she often did, as though she could read the last 8 months of my life written somewhere behind my eyes. "He asked about you," she said. "Before he hired you, wanted to know if I thought you'd be good with Lucia, if you seemed kind. Most employers just ask for references and a background check. He wanted to know if you seemed kind." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you believe you ended up in this house by accident, and I don't think that's true. I think he saw something in your application that told him you needed somewhere safe, more than you needed a paycheck. And I think that's exactly why he chose you over 4 other candidates who had better resumes." I did not know what to say to that, so I drank my tea and let the warmth of it settle something in my chest that had been unsettled for a very long time. Later that week, I overheard a conversation I was not meant to hear, drifting down the hallway from the study where the door had been left slightly open. Damiano's voice, low and controlled, speaking to Marco. "I want eyes on him, not to touch him, just to know where he is, every hour, until I decide otherwise. And if he comes near the house again, then we have a different conversation." I stood frozen in the hallway for a long moment, my tea growing cold in my hands, torn between gratitude and a creeping unease at how easily this man commanded the kind of resources that could track another human being's every movement. It should have frightened me more than it did. Instead, I found myself thinking of Victor's voice on the phone, oily and confident, certain that I would always be reachable, always be findable, always be afraid. And I found that I did not mind, not really, the idea of someone finally being just as relentless on my behalf. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended calm. Ivan drove Lucia and me everywhere, always parking close, always walking us to the door. Marco appeared near the gate more often than before. I did not receive another call from Victor, and I began, cautiously, to hope that whatever quiet warning had been delivered on Damiano's behalf had been enough to make him stop. I was wrong. On the 6th day, as I walked Lucia home from the small park 2 streets from the estate, a familiar car pulled up alongside the curb, and Victor stepped out onto the sidewalk directly in front of us, blocking our path, his face arranged into the calm, reasonable expression he always wore, right before things went wrong. "Elena," he said, smiling at Lucia first, which made my stomach turn. "There you are. I've missed you." "Elena," Victor said again, smiling at Lucia first, which made my stomach turn. "There you are. I've missed you." My legs locked in place. Every instinct I had spent 8 months building, every ounce of courage I had used to walk out of that apartment with a single suitcase, seemed to drain out of me in an instant, and I was standing on a sunlit sidewalk feeling exactly the way I used to feel in the dark of our old kitchen, small and cornered, and certain that whatever happened next was already decided. "Elena, who is that?" Lucia asked, tugging my hand. "Nobody, sweetheart. Just someone I used to know." "That's a cruel thing to call your husband," Victor said, his voice gentle, reasonable, the voice he used in public, the voice that had fooled every friend and neighbor we ever had into believing he was the most patient man alive. "I only want to talk. Is that so much to ask? We're not married anymore, Victor. You need to leave. We're still married on paper, and you know it. You never signed the final documents. Did you forget that? Or did you just not want to remember?" He was right, and the fact that he was right made the panic in my chest worse. I had left before the divorce was finalized, terrified that the process of finalizing it would give him one more chance to find me, one more court date, where he would know exactly where I would be and when. I had told myself I would deal with it eventually, once I felt safe enough. I had not felt safe enough. I still did not. "Move," I said, trying to steer Lucia around him, but he stepped sideways to block the path again, still smiling, still speaking in that calm, reasonable tone that made everyone who did not know him assume he was the wronged party in whatever was happening. "Elena, look at yourself. You're working as a servant for a criminal. Is that really the life you ran off to find? You could have had everything with me. A house, security, a husband who provides for you. Instead, you're pushing some stranger's daughter around the park like a hired maid. I'd rather be a maid in a stranger's house than live one more day in yours." Something shifted in his face then, the reasonable mask slipping just slightly, and I saw underneath it the thing I remembered, the thing that used to appear right before he grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise. "You don't get to talk to me like that," he said, his voice dropping, losing its performance for the crowd that was not there to see it. "Not after everything I gave you." He reached out and closed his hand around my arm, and Lucia let out a small, frightened sound beside me, and for a moment, the whole world narrowed down to the pressure of his fingers and the memory of every time that grip had led to something worse. "Let go of her." The voice came from behind us, quiet, unhurried, and somehow louder than anything Victor had said. I turned my head and saw Damiano walking toward us across the grass, Ivan a step behind him, both of them moving, with the kind of calm that felt far more dangerous than shouting ever could. Victor's hand loosened slightly, though he did not fully release me. "And who exactly are you?" "I'm the man whose daughter you just frightened," Damiano said, stopping a few feet away, close enough that his shadow fell across all 3 of us. "And I'm the man who is telling you, once, to remove your hand from her arm before I remove it for you." Victor laughed, though it came out thin and uncertain. "I've heard about you, Moretti. You think your reputation scares me? Elena is my wife. This is a family matter, and it doesn't concern you. Everything that happens near my daughter concerns me." Damiano's voice had not risen at all, but something in it had changed, gone flat and cold, in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. "And everything that happens to Elena concerns me, because she works in my home, cares for my child, and does not deserve to be grabbed on a public sidewalk by a man who clearly cannot understand the meaning of the word no. This is none of your business. You made it my business the moment you touched her in front of me. Victor's hand finally dropped away from my arm, and I stepped back instinctively, pulling Lucia against my side, my heart still hammering. Victor looked between Damiano and me, something calculating moving behind his eyes, the expression of a man trying to decide whether the person in front of him was truly as dangerous as rumor suggested, or whether the rumors were simply rumors, exaggerated by fear and gossip. You don't know what she's like, Victor said, his tone shifting again, trying a new approach. She's unstable. She exaggerates things. If she's told you stories about our marriage, you should know she has a habit of making herself the victim when things don't go her way. I haven't asked her to tell me anything, Damiano said. I've simply observed the bruises on her wrist that appear every time you find a way to contact her, and I've watched her flinch at closing doors for 3 months straight. I don't need a story, Mr. Cole. I have eyes. Victor's jaw tightened. For the first time since he had stepped out of the car, I saw something like real fear flicker across his face, quickly buried, but not quickly enough. This isn't over, he said, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. She's still my wife. I have rights. You have exactly as many rights as the law grants you, and I would strongly suggest you consult a lawyer about how quickly those rights can disappear when a restraining order is filed and enforced by people who take enforcement seriously. Damiano took one step closer, and Victor, despite himself, took one step back. I am going to say this once, and I need you to understand that I will not say it again. If you come near Elena, if you call her, if you park outside this house, if you so much as walk down a street she happens to be walking down, you will regret it in ways I don't think your imagination is prepared for. Do you understand me? Victor did not answer immediately. He looked at me instead, and for a moment, I saw the man I had married, the version of him that used to exist before the mask cracked completely, looking almost lost, almost like he did not recognize how he had ended up standing on a sidewalk being threatened by a man twice as frightening as he had ever managed to be. Then the moment passed, and his face hardened back into something bitter and cold. You'll regret choosing him over me, he said to me, ignoring Damiano entirely now. Mark my words. Get in your car, Damiano said. Now. Victor looked at Ivan, who had said nothing this entire time, but whose stillness carried its own kind of warning, and something in that silence seemed to finally convince him. He turned, got into his car without another word, and drove away, though not before throwing one last look in the rearview mirror, a look I felt on the back of my neck long after the car had disappeared around the corner. For a long moment, none of us moved. Lucia was crying quietly against my side, and I knelt down to hold her, murmuring reassurances. I was not entirely sure I believed myself, telling her the man was gone, that everything was fine, that Papa had made sure of it. Damiano crouched beside us, his hand resting gently on Lucia's back. Hey, little one, you're safe. I promise you're safe. He scared me, Lucia whispered. I know. He's not going to bother us again. Damiano looked up at me over his daughter's head, and the expression on his face was one I had not seen from him before. Something raw underneath the usual composure. Something that looked almost like fear, though not for himself. Are you hurt? No, I'm fine. Your arm. He didn't have time to do more than grab it. I'm fine, Damiano, truly. It was the first time I had used his first name without the weight of formality attached to it, and I saw him notice. Saw something in his shoulders ease slightly, even as the rest of him remained tense. We walked back to the house in near silence, Lucia held between us, her small hand in mine, and her other hand in her father's. Ivan drove the car back empty, following slowly behind us at a distance, watching the street the entire way. Nora met us at the door, and I could tell from her face that news of what had happened had already reached the house somehow, faster than we had walked it. She took one look at Lucia's red eyes and swept her up into her arms without a word, murmuring something about warm milk and a favorite cartoon, giving Damiano and me the space to stand in the entryway without an audience. You should have called me the moment you saw him, Damiano said, once Lucia was out of earshot. There was no anger in his voice, only something tight and controlled, that I understood now was fear, wearing the mask of composure, the same mask I had worn for years myself. I didn't have time. He was already there. Ivan should have been closer. It isn't Ivan's fault. It happened fast. I wrapped my arms around myself, the adrenaline finally beginning to drain out of me, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't come. I was already on my way to the park. Marco called me the moment the cameras near the corner store picked up his car circling the block again. Damiano's jaw tightened. I should have moved faster. You moved fast enough. He looked at me for a long moment, and something in his expression softened, the tightness around his eyes easing slightly. Go rest. I'll check on Lucia. I did not rest. I sat at the small table in my room and stared at my hands, replaying the moment Victor's fingers closed around my arm, replaying the sound of Lucia's frightened voice, replaying the strange, unfamiliar relief of hearing someone else's voice cut through the fear before it could finish swallowing me whole. I thought about the years before this house, the years when no one had ever stepped between Victor and me, when I had learned to make myself smaller and smaller until there was almost nothing left to grab onto. I thought about how quickly, how easily, Damiano had simply refused to allow the same thing to happen here, as though it had never once occurred to him that stepping in was optional. By the time evening came, Lucia had recovered enough to eat a full dinner and fall asleep clutching her favorite stuffed dragon, and the house had settled back into something resembling its usual quiet rhythm, though I could feel an undercurrent running through it now, a tension in the way the staff moved, in the low voices exchanged near the kitchen, in the way Marco checked the front gate twice as often as he had the day before. That evening, after Lucia had finally settled into a fitful sleep, exhausted from crying, I found Damiano in the study again, standing at the window with his back to the door, a phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and clipped in a way I had not heard before. Track him, he was saying. I want to know where he sleeps tonight, who he calls, everything. A pause. No, not yet. I want to talk to him myself first. I stood in the doorway, unsure whether to announce myself or retreat, and he must have sensed me there, because he turned, and for a moment, we simply looked at each other across the room, the weight of the afternoon still hanging between us. You heard that, he said. It was not a question. Some of it. I need you to understand something. He set the phone down on the desk and crossed the room toward me, stopping close enough that I had to tilt my head slightly to hold his gaze. What I do, the world I operate in, it isn't something I can fully explain to you, and I won't pretend it's clean or simple. But I can promise you this. Victor Cole will never again put his hands on you. Not because I decided you belong to me instead of him, but because no one who works in my home, no one who cares for my daughter the way you do, should have to live afraid of a phone ringing at 2 in the morning. How did you know about the phone call? He hesitated, just slightly. I know most things that happen in this house, Elena. It's how I've kept it, and the people in it, alive this long. I should have felt violated by that, the idea that my privacy had been so thoroughly stripped away without my full knowledge. Instead, standing there in the lamplight with the memory of Victor's hand still burning against my arm, I found myself grateful, in a way that frightened me more than Victor ever had, because gratitude toward a man like Damiano Moretti felt like standing at the edge of something I did not fully understand, and choosing to step forward anyway. What happens now? I asked. Now, he said quietly, you go to sleep, and you let me handle the rest. I did not sleep. I lay awake in my narrow bed, listening to the house breathe around me, listening for the sound of cars in the driveway, and sometime near midnight, I heard one. An engine, low and controlled, pulling out through the front gate. I rose and went to the window, and I watched 2 dark cars ease down the driveway and disappear into the night, their headlights swallowed quickly by the dark street beyond the estate walls. I did not know where they were going. Some part of me, the part that had spent 8 months learning to survive on instinct alone, told me I did not want to know. I climbed back into bed and lay there until the first gray light of morning began to creep through the curtains, my mind circling the same question over and over, unable to land anywhere close to peace. What exactly had I asked for, simply by staying in this house. Somewhere near dawn, exhaustion finally won, and I drifted into a thin, uneasy sleep filled with fragments of the afternoon. Victor's hand on my arm, Lucia's frightened voice, the flat, cold calm in Damiano's tone when he told Victor to remove his hand or have it removed for him. When I woke, the sun was already high, and for a moment I lay still, listening to the ordinary sounds of the house waking around me, footsteps in the hallway, the distant clatter of pans in the kitchen, Lucia's laughter drifting up through the floorboards. For one brief, disorienting moment, it almost felt like an ordinary morning. Then I remembered the two cars pulling out of the driveway in the dead of night, and the ordinary feeling collapsed all at once, replaced by a low, steady dread that followed me all the way down the stairs and into the kitchen, where Nora was waiting with a cup of coffee and an expression I could not quite read. "Sleep well?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Not really." "That's understandable, given the day you had." She slid the coffee across the counter toward me and studied my face for a long moment. "He didn't come back last night. Damiano, I mean. His bed wasn't slept in." "Where did he go?" Nora's expression flickered, something careful and deliberate settling over her features, the look of a woman who had spent years learning exactly how much to say and how much to leave unsaid. "I couldn't tell you," she said. "But I imagine we'll all find out soon enough." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup and said nothing, though the dread in my chest tightened another degree, and somewhere beneath it, buried deep enough that I did not want to examine it too closely, something else stirred as well. Not fear exactly, something closer to a terrible, complicated relief. By noon, Victor still had not called, and the silence itself felt louder than any threat he had ever made. I tried to keep myself busy, folding Lucia's laundry, helping her build a tower of blocks that she insisted needed to reach the ceiling, anything to keep my hands moving, and my mind from circling back to the empty side of Damiano's bed and the two cars that had vanished into the dark the night before. But every time the front door opened, I found myself listening for his voice, and every time it was only Marco, or a delivery, or Ivan returning from an errand, the tight knot in my chest pulled a little tighter. Damiano finally returned just after 2 in the afternoon. I heard the front door and hurried into the entryway, and the sight of him stopped me cold. He looked exhausted in a way I had never seen on him before, his jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up, a faint shadow of stubble on his jaw that had not been there the night before. But he was unharmed, and something in his shoulders had eased, as though a weight he had been carrying for a long time had finally been set down. "You're back," I said, and then felt foolish for stating something so obvious. "I'm back." He studied my face, and whatever he saw there made him step closer, lowering his voice even though we were alone in the hallway. "Are you all right? You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't. Where were you?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words with the same careful precision he seemed to bring to everything. "I told you last night that Victor Cole would never touch you again. I spent the night making sure that promise was true." My stomach turned over slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means you don't need to be afraid of a phone ringing at 2 in the morning anymore." He reached out, hesitated, then rested his hand gently on my shoulder, the gesture careful, almost asking permission. "It means you're safe, Elena. Completely and permanently safe." "Damiano, what did you do?" I had a long conversation with him. I explained, in terms he finally understood, exactly what would happen if he ever came near this house, near you, or near my daughter again. "That's all?" He held my gaze, and something in his silence told me there was more to the story than he intended to share, at least not yet, at least not standing in a hallway in the middle of the afternoon. "That's what you need to know for now," he said gently. "I promise you, no harm will come to you from him ever again." I wanted to press further, but Lucia came barreling down the hallway just then, throwing herself at her father's legs with a shriek of delight, and the moment for questions dissolved into the ordinary business of scooping her up and listening to an excited, breathless account of the block tower she had built. I watched Damiano's face transform as he listened to his daughter, the exhaustion in his eyes softening into something warm and present, and I found myself wondering, not for the first time, how a man could hold so much darkness in one hand and so much gentleness in the other. That evening, once Lucia was asleep, I finally worked up the courage to turn my phone back on, half expecting another call from Victor, some new threat, some new attempt to pull me back into the life I had spent 8 months trying to escape. Instead, I found nothing. No missed calls. No messages. I checked twice, certain I had made a mistake, but the silence held. I tried calling the number Victor had used the night before, the one that had woken me at 2 in the morning, and it rang twice before an automated voice informed me the number was no longer in service. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at the phone, trying to understand what that meant. Numbers did not simply stop working overnight, not unless someone made a deliberate choice to disconnect them. The next morning, I found myself standing in the kitchen with Nora, watching the news on the small television mounted above the counter, half listening while I prepared Lucia's breakfast. A local segment came on, brief and forgettable, about a man reported missing by his employer after failing to show up for work 2 days in a row. The photograph they showed lasted only a few seconds, but I recognized the face immediately, and the spoon I was holding slipped from my fingers and clattered against the counter. It was Victor. Nora glanced at the screen, then at me, her expression carefully neutral. "You knew him," she said. It was not a question. "That's my ex-husband." "I see. Nora, what happened to him?" She turned off the television and began wiping down the counter with more focus than the task required. "I couldn't say. I don't ask questions about things that happen outside this kitchen, and I'd suggest, gently, that you might consider doing the same. I can't just not ask. If something happened to him because of me, nothing happened to him because of you." Nora set down the cloth and turned to face me fully, her expression softening. "Whatever happened, happened because of choices he made a long time before he ever met Damiano Moretti. You are not responsible for the consequences of another person's cruelty, Elena. Not his cruelty toward you, and not whatever cruelty led him to wherever he is now." I did not find the words comforting. Not entirely, but I understood the kindness behind them, and I let the subject drop, at least for the moment. I spent the rest of the morning in a strange, disconnected fog, going through the motions of the day, watching Lucia with half my attention, while the other half turned over the image of Victor's photograph on the news. The words missing, failed to show up for work, no known location. I spent the rest of the morning trying to distract myself, and failing. Lutua. I took Lucia into the playroom and built the block tower even higher than the day before, laughing when it toppled, gathering the pieces to try again, but my mind kept drifting back to the photograph on the screen, the word missing hovering behind everything I did. At one point, Lucia looked up at me, with the unsettling perceptiveness that children sometimes have, and asked why I looked sad, and I told her I wasn't sad, only tired, and she seemed to accept that answer, even though I was not sure I believed it myself. I found Marco near the front gate around midday, standing in his usual spot, scanning the street with the same quiet vigilance he always carried. I approached him slowly, unsure if he would tell me anything at all. But I needed to ask someone, and Nora had already made clear she would not be the one to answer. "Marco," I said, "were you there, last night?" He looked at me for a long moment, weighing something behind his eyes. I was. "Is he all right? Victor, is he hurt? He's breathing. He's walking. He has a plane ticket to a city far from here, and enough fear in him to make sure he uses it." Marco's voice was flat, professional, but not unkind. "That's all I can tell you, and honestly, all you should want to know. I need to understand what I'm part of now. What kind of world I've stepped into." Marco considered this, then softened slightly, the way people did around me sometimes, when they remembered I was not truly part of this world, only living alongside its edges. "You're not part of anything, Elena. You're the reason he stopped, for one night, being the kind of man who does what needs doing without a second thought. That's rarer than you know. Most people who work for him never see that side of him. You should consider it a strange kind of gift, even if it doesn't feel like one right now." I did not know what to make of that, and I thanked him and walked away with more questions than I had arrived with, though somewhere underneath the confusion, a small, steady certainty had begun to take root. Whatever Damiano was, whatever darkness lived in the corners of his world, He had turned all of it, deliberately and without hesitation, toward protecting me. I had spent 2 years married to a man who used his power to make me smaller, and I had spent the last week watching a far more dangerous man use his power to make sure I never had to be small again. The contrast unsettled me almost as much as it moved me. I found Damiano in the garden that afternoon, sitting on the stone bench near the roses, a place he rarely visited during the day. He looked up as I approached, and something in my face must have told him what I already knew. "You saw the news," he said quietly. "Yes, sit with me." I sat, keeping a careful distance between us, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "Is he dead?" Damiano did not answer immediately, and the silence stretched long enough that I felt my heart begin to pound in my ears. "No," he said finally, "he isn't dead." "Then where is he?" "Somewhere far from here. Somewhere he will not be returning from. Not without consequences far worse than anything he's faced so far. I gave him a choice, Elena. Leave this city. Leave this state. Cut every connection to the life he had here. And never attempt to contact you again. Or face the alternative. He chose to leave. You threatened him." I made him understand the reality of his situation. Damiano's voice remained level, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the careful control he was exercising over something that clearly did not come naturally to him. Restraint. "I won't pretend to you that the methods I used were gentle, or that they belong to a world you should ever have to know more about than you already do. But I will tell you this. He is alive. He is unharmed, beyond whatever fear I made certain he would carry with him. And he will never come near you again, because he understands now, completely, what will happen if he tries." I sat with that for a long moment, watching the afternoon light move across the rose bushes, trying to sort through the tangle of feelings inside me. Relief undeniable and overwhelming, the kind of relief that came from finally understanding that a threat which had followed me for 8 months had simply, permanently, ceased to exist. And beneath the relief, something more complicated, a discomfort at how easily this man beside me had reached into another person's life and rearranged it entirely, without hesitation, without apparent doubt. "You didn't have to do this," I said finally. "I know." "Then why did you?" He turned to look at me, and the answer, when it came, was quiet and entirely without performance. "Because for 3 months, I have watched you flinch at sounds that shouldn't frighten anyone, and I have watched you hide the evidence of what that man did to you, like it was something to be ashamed of, and I decided I was no longer willing to let that continue while I had the ability to stop it. I'm not asking you to be grateful, Elena. I'm not asking you for anything at all. I only needed you to be safe, and now you are." I did not know what to say to that. I sat beside him in the garden, as the afternoon light slowly shifted toward evening, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I let myself imagine what it might feel like to stop watching the door, to stop checking the locks twice before bed, to simply exist in a house without the constant hum of fear running underneath everything. It felt, I realized slowly, almost like breathing for the first time in years. "Thank you," I said finally, the words feeling insufficient for the size of what he had done, but the only words I had. "You don't need to thank me. I know I don't need to. I want to." He reached over, gently, and took my hand, the same hand he had held once before over broken glass, and this time, I did not pull away. We sat there together, as the sun sank lower over the garden wall, and for the first time since I had come to this house, the silence between us did not feel like something to be afraid of. It felt like the beginning of something else entirely. 3 weeks passed before I finally asked Damiano the question I had been avoiding since the afternoon in the garden, and when I finally asked it, we were standing in the kitchen at midnight, both of us unable to sleep, sharing a pot of tea in the quiet, the way we had started to do more often since the night everything changed. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "What you did to Victor?" He considered the question with the same careful weight he seemed to give everything. "No," he said. "I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret doing it." "Is there a difference?" "I think there has to be, or a man in my position would go mad trying to carry the weight of every hard choice, as though it were the same as cruelty for its own sake." He set down his cup and looked at me directly. I've done things in my life I'm not proud of, Elena. Things I hope my daughter never learns the details of. But making sure a man who hurt you for years will never have the chance to hurt you again isn't one of them. If that makes me dangerous in your eyes, I understand. I won't ask you to see me differently than what I am. I studied him for a long moment, turning the words over, weighing them against everything I had witnessed since the day I first saw the bruise slip out from under my sleeve. I don't think I need to see you differently, I said finally. I think I've been seeing exactly who you are for weeks now, and I keep waiting for that to frighten me the way it probably should. And does it? Sometimes. Not in the way you'd expect. I wrapped both hands around my cup, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers. I spent 2 years married to a man who never once raised a hand against anyone but me, who never once used his strength to protect anyone but himself, and I was terrified of him every single day. I've spent 3 months in this house with a man capable of far more than Victor ever was, and for the first time in years, I sleep without checking the lock twice. Something moved across Damiano's face, quiet and unguarded, an expression I had learned to recognize as the rare moments when the careful control he wore like armor slipped just slightly. I don't want you to feel obligated, he said. Not to me, not because of what happened with Victor. I didn't do what I did to earn something from you. I know that. Then what is it you're trying to tell me? I set my cup down and made myself hold his gaze, though every instinct built by 2 years of fear told me to look away, to make myself smaller, to avoid saying anything that might invite consequences I could not predict. But this was not that house, and he was not that man, and I was tired, so deeply tired, of shrinking myself to fit inside the shape of someone else's fear. I'm telling you that I trust you, I said, more than I've trusted anyone in longer than I can remember. And I don't fully understand how that happened, given everything I know about who you are and what you do, but I know it's true, and I've decided I'm done pretending otherwise. The silence that followed stretched long enough that I began to wonder if I had said too much, misread something, made myself vulnerable in a way I would regret. Then Damiano reached across the small distance between us and took my hand, the same careful, deliberate gesture he had used the night in the garden, and this time, there was nothing hesitant in it at all. I have wanted to say something to you for weeks, he said quietly. I kept telling myself it wasn't appropriate. You work in my home. You care for my daughter. You came here running from a man who used power to control you, and the last thing I wanted was to become another version of that. Another powerful man who decided he had a claim on you simply because he had the means to protect you. You're not that. I need you to understand something, before this goes any further. What I do, the world I live in, it doesn't stop existing just because tonight feels quiet and safe. There will be other nights, like the one with Victor. There will be dangers I can't fully explain to you, decisions I'll make that you won't always be able to understand or forgive. If you choose to stand beside me, truly beside me, you're choosing all of it, not just the parts that feel safe. I thought about that, about the weight of what he was offering and warning me against in the same breath, about the 2 years I had spent married to danger disguised as gentleness, and the 3 months I had spent living beside gentleness disguised as danger. I thought about Lucia's small hand in mine every morning, about the way this house had slowly stopped feeling like a place I was hiding and started feeling like a place I belonged. I spent 2 years afraid of a man who never protected anyone but himself, I said. I think I can learn to live beside a man who would burn the world down to protect the people he loves, as long as I understand what I'm choosing. I'm not naive, Damiano. I know what this means. And you're choosing it anyway. I'm choosing it anyway. He pulled me closer then, slowly, giving me every chance to pull away if I wanted to, and when I did not, he wrapped his arms around me, and I let myself lean into the solid warmth of him, feeling something in my chest that had been clenched tight for 2 years finally begin, cautiously, to loosen. Not everyone in the household greeted the change between us with the same ease Lucia and Nora did. A week after that midnight conversation in the kitchen, I overheard 2 of the security staff talking near the garage, their voices low but not quiet enough, wondering aloud whether Damiano had lost his sense by letting himself get close to the nanny, whether it made him vulnerable in ways a man in his position could not afford. I did not tell him what I had heard, but he must have sensed the shift in me over dinner that night, because later, once Lucia was asleep, he asked directly what was wrong. "Some of your men think this is a mistake," I said. "You and me. Some of my men are paid to worry about my safety, not my happiness. I don't hold that against them." He studied my face carefully. "Does it bother you what they think?" "It bothers me that being close to you might make things harder for you. That I might become something someone could use against you. You let me worry about that." His voice carried no anger, only a quiet certainty that settled something in my chest. "I've spent my whole life being careful, calculating every risk, before I let myself want anything. I'm done calculating this one. If that makes me vulnerable, I'll take the risk gladly, because the alternative is spending the rest of my life protecting everything except the one thing that actually makes it worth protecting." I did not have an answer for that, so I simply let him pull me close, and in the weeks that followed, I noticed the whispers near the garage grow quieter, then stop altogether, as though the household had slowly come to accept what Lucia had accepted from the very beginning, without ever needing to be told. The weeks that followed brought a kind of peace I had not believed myself capable of feeling again. Lucia, sensing the shift between her father and me long before either of us said anything out loud, began finding small reasons to leave us alone together, disappearing into her room with a knowing smile that seemed far too old for a 6-year-old, until Nora finally laughed and told me the girl had been rooting for this since the week I arrived. I did not stop being careful. Old habits, built over years of survival, do not disappear simply because the danger that created them has passed. I still checked the locks some nights, still flinched occasionally at sounds too sudden or too loud, still carried, somewhere underneath the peace, a residue of fear that I understood might never fully leave me. But Damiano never once made me feel foolish for it. He simply noticed, quietly, and adjusted, closing doors more gently, announcing himself before entering a room, giving me the space to heal at whatever pace healing required, without ever making me feel like I owed him gratitude for the patience. One evening, nearly 2 months after the night Victor disappeared from the city entirely, I finally worked up the courage to wear a short-sleeved dress to dinner, the first time I had done so since long before I left my marriage. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, studying my own bare arms, unmarked now, the last of the old bruises long since faded into nothing, and I felt something unfamiliar settle over me. Not fear, not the old instinct to cover myself, to hide, to make myself smaller and less visible. Something closer to freedom. When I came downstairs, Damiano looked up from where he sat with Lucia at the table, and I watched his gaze move to my bare arms, watched something soften in his expression, quiet and understanding, though he said nothing about it directly. He simply reached out and pulled my chair back for me, and Lucia launched immediately into an excited retelling of her day, and the three of us sat together in the warm evening light, and for the first time since I had walked away from Victor with nothing but a suitcase and a desperate hope for safety, I let myself believe, fully and without reservation, that I had finally found it. Later that night, after Lucia was asleep and the house had settled into its familiar quiet, I stood at the window of my room, the same window I had once watched anxiously for headlights that never should have been there, and looked out over the garden below, silver and still under the moonlight. I heard the door open softly behind me and did not need to turn to know who it was. "Couldn't sleep?" Damiano asked, coming to stand beside me at the window. "I was just thinking about how different this view looks now." "Different how?" "I used to stand here and watch for cars that shouldn't have been there. Now I just watch the garden." I leaned into him slightly, and he wrapped an arm around my shoulders, warm and solid and entirely unlike anything I had known before. It's strange how much a place can change without a single thing about it actually being different. It's just me who changed. "You didn't just change," he said quietly. "You survived something that should have broken you, and instead of letting it, you built yourself back into someone stronger. I only made sure you had the space to do that safely. You did more than that, and we both know it." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the garden below. "I know what people say about men like me," he said finally. "That we don't know how to love gently, that everything we touch we eventually damage. I spent a long time believing that myself, especially after Lucia's mother died, when I thought I had nothing left in me worth offering anyone. Then you came into this house, careful and quiet, and trying so hard to disappear, and somehow, without either of us intending it, you reminded me that I still had something gentle left to give. I turned to look at him fully, searching his face in the moonlight, finding nothing there but honesty, unguarded and simple. I think we saved each other, I said, in our own ways. I think you're right. We stood together at the window for a long while after that, not speaking, simply existing in the quiet safety of a house that had once terrified me and now felt, undeniably, like home. Somewhere below us, the garden roses Damiano's late wife had planted years ago swayed gently in the night breeze, and somewhere down the hall, Lucia slept soundly, dreaming whatever dreams 6-year-olds dream when they finally feel completely safe. I thought about the bruise Damiano had glimpsed on my wrist the very first night, the moment that had set everything else into motion, and I realized, standing there in the moonlight with his arm around me, that the man who had once made me flinch at closing doors no longer had any power over me at all, not even in memory. He had become nothing more than a story I would someday tell, if I chose to tell it at all. A difficult chapter that had ended, finally and completely, the moment I let myself believe I deserved something better. I had come to this house hiding bruises and flinching at shadows, certain that safety was something other people got to have, something that had never quite been meant for me. I had found, instead, a man dangerous enough to end a threat I had carried for years, and gentle enough to hold my hand while I learned, slowly, how to stop being afraid. By sunrise the next morning, the garden was bathed in soft golden light, and I stood in the kitchen making coffee, unhurried, unafraid, listening to Lucia's laughter drifting down from upstairs, and Damiano's footsteps following close behind. For the first time in longer than I could remember, the sound of footsteps in the house did not make me flinch at all. It simply made me smile, and turn toward the door, and wait for the two people who had become, without either of them fully intending it, the family I had never let myself hope for again.